Hey everyone, Stryster here. The following video that you're about to watch is a compilation of the stories I covered in my Learning to Love Ken Penders duology over on my main channel. This little series I made is to essentially give you a shortened but still informative cut of the vids on the main channel. I still highly recommend watching those uploads, links will be in the description below. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video. Hey everyone, my name's Stryster, and for today's video, we're going to be talking about Ken Penders. Now I know that this video is primarily focused on the stories that Penders wrote, but since this is going to be the only chance I'll get to talk about it, let's address the elephant in the room, Ken Penders and his artwork. On my Ron Lim video, I noticed a large majority of comments saying that Ken Penders is actually the worst Sonic artist of all time. So, after looking through various pieces of art, is Ken Penders the worst official Sonic artist of all time? No, not even close. Ken Penders' art during his early days at Archie is nothing really to write home about. It's an overall decent style that replicates the artwork of its time. The main quirks within his art style boil down to the relatively large eyes, which is an overall hit or miss for me in my opinion. Sometimes it's good, but later down the line when he tried to add detail within the eyes, it's off-putting for me. Another aspect of Penders' art that's rather questionable is how he implements muscles. Even when the art is good, I still don't like how it looks with the way they failed to blend in with Sonic's design. It kinda just feels like changes were made for the sake of being different. Unfortunately, this specific part of his art would worsen as time progressed. I think the reason why people mostly label Ken Penders as the worst Sonic artist is due to his work outside of Archie. You can see that the issues that were minor inconveniences for me at best have now warped into something that looks rather alien. But using his outside work to label him as the worst Archie Sonic artist is completely invalid. This popular idea that any bad art equals Ken Penders has garnered a negative effect, in which any art that looks remotely bad in Archie Sonic is labeled as Penders, despite the fact there are many artists that have also made bad art. I've seen artwork from Steven Butler, Ron Lim, and Chris Allen labeled as Ken Penders art. All three of these individuals alone have very distinct characteristics to their art style. Just because an artist made not so good looking art doesn't automatically mean it equates to Penders. While I do think his art has become a significant hit or miss, his art decline happened outside his time at Archie. The art that he's officially done isn't all that bad. It may have some odd changes to say the least, but doesn't claim the title of worst Sonic artist. Now, I know some of you are going to ask who I think is the worst artist of the series. I saw a lot of comments mentioning various artists that you guys think were the worst. Even with the amount of media surrounding the franchise at this point, what even is Sonic art? Or even Sonic the Hedgehog? Art is really subjective. And at the end of the day, I'm just messing with you guys, the worst artist is still Ron Lim. You cannot convince me otherwise. In October 1994, Archie Comics graced the world with a Sonic In Your Face special. This was a one-shot comic that featured a collection of stories, even one from artist Patrick Spaziante. But the one we're going to be focusing on today is The Quest by Ken Penders and Mike Kantarovich. This story concludes on a backup story found in issues 17 and 18 that aid in the characterization of Sally Acorn, as she reminisces about her past and how Robotnik took over Mobius. In addition to that, a mysterious orb has appeared, and issue 18 also features the death of her mentor, Julia, who taught her that wisdom cannot be taught, but acquired. All of these recent events have been weighing heavy on her head, and after a quick sparring match with Sonic, she digs through Julia's stuff to find a blue vest and a map, prompting her to go on an adventure the next day. However, she's not going alone, as the Freedom Fighters join her with the aid of the mysterious orb, which is none other than Nicole, a supercomputer that Sally befriends. The group make their way to the Forbidden Zone, where they face off against 3 different Guardians: a Cyclops, which they beat by not moving, a fire-breathing Griffin, which Tails defeats by pulling out the sword, instantly stopping the creature, and a two-headed dragon, which they have to solve a riddle in order to get past it. What they find at the end is a scroll, which has the crew perplexed. However, 20 years later, thanks to Julia's teachings, the war against Robotnik has been won, and things are looking bright for the team. Rotor makes the finishing touches on Nicole and sends her back to where the events of this story begin. The quest is a pretty interesting story, as it gives off a Sad AM vibe and even introduces multiple elements from the TV series. The adventure itself is another fun tale, and it was nice that Sonic and Tails got their moments to shine in this Sally-centric story. Although, it is a letdown that Antoine and Bunny were just there during the issue. While the story took a serious tone, it wasn't all just for show, as Julia plays an important emotional drive for Sally. While we didn't get enough time with her in the prologue leading to the special, we can see her influence throughout the story, and it's all handled wonderfully. With a bit of action and character growth, The Quest is a fantastic story that explores Sally's past and relation with her mentor, and allows for some interesting character depth of the titular freedom fighter. The Archie Sonic comics had a variety of character multi-part stories. Tails got his own, which featured a Thayer, the 40 Fathom Freedom Fighters, and even the Down Under Freedom Fighters. Knuckles would get his own that aided in expanding the comics lore on the Echidnas, and introduced a variety of new heroes and enemies, and helped start the 32-issue spin-off by Ken Penders. But we're gonna take a look at the 3-part miniseries about Sally Acorn. The Princess Sally miniseries follows up on the events in the backup story in Sonic the Hedgehog issue 20. To sum it up, Sally destroys one of Robotnik's bases and encounters Geoffrey St. John, a former member of King Max's Secret Service and the leader of an underground freedom fighting group. Sally and Geoffrey are ambushed by some SWAT bots, but take them out with ease. We are then introduced to a group of freedom fighters in training. One of them, Hamlin, doesn't trust Geoffrey. I mean, I don't blame him. He did get jumped by him out of nowhere, but Geoffrey's on the team, and the gang head to another Robotnik base hidden near the edge of the Great Forest. Sally attempts to detonate the place, but suddenly gets chased by a couple of orb bots. The orb bot falls into a ditch, and part 1 ends with Geoffrey heading over to a secret area where another Sally is residing in a tube. What's truly going on with Geoffrey? Our answers lie in the second part, as the group head to one more base located within an atoll, forcing the heroes to approach it in the air. One of the freedom fighters, Arlo, didn't land so well, so he and Penelope sit this base raid out. They make it, only for Sally and Co to get captured by an octopod robot. Geoffrey uses some explosives, and the robot is destroyed along with the base itself. However, when they leave, Arlo and Penelope are gone. Sally urges the team to leave the premises. Staying would only bring more harm than good, and so they all head back to their camp. Geoffrey sneaks back to the secret base with another unconscious Sally to reveal that what we've been following was a duplicate. As the team continue their way to raid yet another base, Geoffrey delivers to Robotnik Sally? The finale concludes with Sally and Co. coming face to face with Robotnik and Geoffrey. The team thinks that the real Sally is about to be roboticized, but they don't know about the switch up from the previous part, which leads to the roboticizer blowing up the Robo-Double. As a last-ditch effort, Robotnik sends in some self-bots and self-destructs his fortress, but the underground rebel crew, along with Arlo and Penelope, come to the rescue. Sally and Co escape the base, and the story ends with Sally and Geoffrey parting their separate ways, and the princess heads back to Knothole. Deadliest of the Species is a fantastic action story that blends some emotional aspects and some incredible action-oriented moments to deliver a solid and fun 3-part adventure. While I do think the formula of the group heading to a base and destroying it felt a bit repetitive, Penders was able to add a bit of mystery with the newcomer to the series, Geoffrey, who seemingly is portrayed as a double agent for Robotnik, but actually was helping out the heroes all along. This whole mini-series was fun from start to finish, and shows that Ken can write a pretty compelling story that balances spectacle and substance without neglecting either one of those two elements to deliver a fantastic story. The last story on this list focuses yet on another battle between Sonic the Hedgehog and his friendly nemesis, Knuckles the Echidna. But now with a very interesting twist, the Freedom Fighters versus the Chaotix. Who will come out on top? After a distress signal from Knuckles, the Freedom Fighters head to the floating island only to find the Chaotix. They've just finished taking out some enemies thanks to the Sword of Acorn, and tell the Freedom Fighters to beat it. So they all battle it out, and the Chaotix and Freedom Fighters retreat. Each team questions why the other side is acting so unreasonable, and Knuckles makes it on the scene, and they brawl yet again. Archimedes and Sally try to de-escalate the situation by leading Dulcie to Archimedes. The both of them cause an explosion, which causes everyone to disappear. Mammoth Mogul and the Fearsome Four appear. Mogul gloats over how successful his plan is, as he's tricked both teams by creating illusions of the Fearsome Four to resemble the opposite team. However, before he can continue, the real Chaotix and Freedom Fighters ambush Mogul and his team. Sally suspected that something was up with the help from Archimedes. They created that explosion distraction and teleported everyone to safety. They noted that there were some holes in Mogul's illusions, such as Bunny lifting a boulder with her organic arm, and Sonic not being as fast as he usually is. Everyone tries to dogpile Mogul, and Archimedes tries luring a Chaos Emerald to Mogul's emerald in his staff, causing the villain to vanish, leaving the Sword of Acorn. Knuckles gets knighted, and the Freedom Fighters head home. However, Mogul reveals in the end to actually possessing the real Sword of Acorn. Battle Royal is an interesting story that actually finds a clever way of having Sonic and Co. battle the Chaotix, even if they weren't actually fighting each other. While the whole diversion seems a bit contrived for my taste, Ken was still able to deliver an incredible action-packed story, with the addition of Sam Maxwell's dynamic and abstract pencils that really sold me on the experience. One thing that does confuse me, however, is the ending, where we can see a fully decrystallized King Max. He would stay crystallized up until Return of the King, so that was just kinda odd. While it doesn't really stick the landing that well, Battle Royal functions as a decent action-adventure story. If you like some fast-paced action with a hint of magic and mystery, this is the story for you. Archie Sonic the Hedgehog issues 47 to 50 introduces us to the Endgame saga, the final battle between Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Robotnik. 46 issues of build-up all lead to this, so let's look at each of these parts and see what made this ultimate battle so ultimate. In issue 47, we see the Freedom Fighters attempt to break into Robotnik's base. Sally contemplates the recent revelation from her father that Sonic is a traitor. However, she believes that Sonic would never betray the Freedom Fighters. As Sally descends down from a rope, we see Sonic murder Sally? Going back to the real Sonic, he unsuccessfully attempts to defeat Robotnik in his base and heads back to Knothole. When he reaches there, however, he's in for a surprise as he's falsely accused for murdering Sally and taken away by Geoffrey and his troop, leading into the next issue. Issue 48 begins with Geoffrey transporting Sonic to the Devil's Gulag, while everyone else at Knothole questions if Sonic truly killed Sally. While they believe that they saw him cut the rope with their own two eyes, Uncle Chuck is firm in believing that his nephew is innocent. The ship Sonic is on gets sabotaged and he escapes into a cave, reminiscing over his chat with Chuck over the possibility that there is a traitor in their midst. Antoine and Bunny eavesdrop on Drago, who seems to have some sort of scheme with Hershey the cat, but they're caught and sent to Down Under, while Robotnik makes his way into Knothole. The comic finally ends with Geoffrey catching up to Sonic via a tracking chip in his shackles. He and Sonic duke it out, with Sonic jumping off a cliff to escape. In issue 49, Robotnik reveals that the King was actually a robot duplicate. He lets Sonic's friends know that he'll let them live for now, as he has one of his most powerful inventions yet. Sonic escapes with the help of Dulcie the Dragon, and we're shown who the real perpetrator is, none other than Hershey, who was tricked into wearing a Sonic mask. The eye sections use optic image refractors to show Snively's face instead of Sally's during the incident. Bunny and Antoine escape Down Under, and Sonic comes face to face with Knuckles and Geoffrey, the comic stating that issue 50 will finally conclude this entire saga. Now logically, issue 50 is the next one on the chopping block. However, there's a bit of history surrounding why we won't go into it and look at the super special reprint Sonic 50 Director's Cut. After Satiam's cancellation, it was believed that Archie comics would soon be canned too as well, so issue 50 was originally intended to be the final issue, until it wasn't when Archie was told that the series wouldn't end at 50. Because of the timing of the news, various changes were made, such as not killing off Sally and shortening issue 50 to fit into the comic's regular page limit. Because of the page limit specifically, many scenes that were fleshed out in the director's cut were just gone in the final print. So due to these changes, we'll be looking at 50's Super Special reprint. Archie Sonic Super Special Issue 6 begins with a flashback introducing us to how Dr. Robotnik helped the Mobians in the Great War. As he wakes up, he tests out his latest and greatest weapon, the Ultimate Annihilator, on a captured Overlander, obliterating him instantly. However, we see that Snively is planning to sabotage his uncle's devious plan. Continuing from 49, Sonic is dealing with Joffrey and Knuckles until Dulcie the Dragon steps in to clear his name. Back at Knothole, Tails and Rotor try to escape with their water vehicles, but are captured by robots. Bunny and Antoine escape Down Under and find out about the Ultimate Annihilator, and Sonic and Co. save Tails and Rotor. Sonic finds Drago, who attempts to run away, but Hershey attacks him and knocks him out with a rock. Despite Sonic's efforts, Robotnik eliminates Knothole, and Sonic and Robotnik have one final duel, which ends with Robotnik being killed by his own weapon in the process. Sonic survives and wakes up later, and we learn from Dr. Quack that he was threatened to help create the Annihilator. What we also know is that Sally is still alive, but still in a coma. Sonic gives her a kiss, and just like that, she's awake, and peace has been restored to Mobius, at least for now. Endgame is a solid story arc to conclude the era of this series. Penders shows that not only can he raise the stakes to their absolute limit within these issues, but deliver an incredible conclusion with substance in between. Having emotional aspects to the plot such as Sonic's true understanding of the severeness within the situation he's in, his friends being torn between Sonic's supposed murder attempt. The fact that Penders permanently killed off the main villain is astounding to say the least. While you think certain elements of the story make it fundamentally weak, especially if you consider the fact that the Ultimate Annihilator would have just killed Robotnik regardless of what Sonic did, Endgame is still an incredibly ambitious story that deserves a lot of credit for what it did for Archie Sonic. From issues 131 to 144, Penders wrote a spin-off story saga showing readers what Mobius would be like in the future, Mobius 25 years later. The series would continue after Penders' departure with Ian Flynn, with issues 166 and 167, along with Mobius 30 years later, and even Penders' Laura Sue Chronicles, which is still in development at the time of this recording. But for now, however, let's look at the original 25 years later. Since there are like 13 different issues for me to look at, I've decided to summarize the plot as best as possible, rather than go through each individual issue for the sake of brevity. The main plot surrounding this series is the ever-imminent crisis of the space-time continuum collapsing on itself, with Rotor and Kobar in issue 132 discovering the cause of this problem. Various events from Sonic's adventures have resulted in jeopardizing Mobius' future. Rotor meets up with Knuckles in issue 133 to explain his recent discovery, noting the constant thunderstorms. King Sonic and Knuckles meet up together in issue 140, reminiscing the recent news from Rotor. Sonic is a bit confused considering the fact that Knuckles turned into Chaos Knuckles and not only defeated Robotnik, but also outright remade Mobius in the process. Considering the fact he tampered with reality, Sonic doesn't understand how that didn't cause their current dilemma. In issue 141, Kobar and Rotor pinpoint where Sonic caused the strain of the space-time continuum. Sonic's first time using the Cosmic Interstate, Robotnik using the Ultimate Annihilator, and Sonic destroying the Quantum Dial. Rotor and Kobar figure out in the next issue that if they use Robotnik's Tachyon Displacement Chamber, they could send someone 25 years in the past and stop the collapse. Sonic volunteers to be the one sent back in time in the final issue. However, when Sonic is being sent back to the chamber, it seems to be malfunctioning and Sonic is gone before the machine could be shut down. Mobius 25 years later is an interesting story to say the least. Penders does his best with utilizing the setting to his advantage. The character interactions with Knuckles and his daughter is great. I enjoyed seeing Knuckles eventually letting his daughter become more and more independent and becoming the future Guardian near the end of the series, as we see him coming to terms with not falling into his father's previous footsteps. Seeing other characters interact with each other in the stories such as Slumber Party in issue 139 was also a really nice addition to really flesh out this brand new setting and world of future Mobius. The best thing I liked was Sonic's mood change near the end of the series. Seeing him slowly go back into the Sonic we know and love, and eventually sacrificing himself to save the world, was a fantastic way for Mobius 25 years later to end. Unfortunately, after Mobius 25 years later, a lot of his work released during the latter half at Archie wasn't that great. His stories were either haphazard melodramas like issues 155 and 156, incompetent plots like 150 to 152, or worst of them all, The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown. A story that fails to deliver a proper battle between these three hedgehogs, along with dragging out a story for absolutely no reason that ends in a conclusion that falls flat on its face. However, despite this period of the comic continuing on a downward spiral, Penders would pick up with this string of comics with the grandiose return of Shadow the Hedgehog. In issue 157, Shadow stumbles upon an abandoned military base and finds a message from Gerald Robotnik. He finds out that his purpose was dedicated to nothing more than vengeance. However, before he can find out more info about himself, Metal Sonic just shows up and they fight until they're knocked out. Robotnik's robot daughter Mecha finds them and takes them both to his base. While the first half of this story is dedicated to a rather lackluster fight that interrupts any proper character development for Shadow, where the story really picks up is in the second half. Dr. Robotnik gets an alarm from his computer that he will undergo a system shutdown in 12 hours. Robotnik tries to search for the source, but results are unsuccessful, with the only possibility that Snively or Sally might be behind this. Robotnik decides to pay a visit to the Freedom Fighters later that morning, while Sonic races over to meet his nemesis. I do find it rather stupid that Rotor and Tails just let him waltz his way into Knothole only because he didn't show any hostile action towards the residents. You guys really think it's a good idea for this guy of all people to just make his way to your place just because he isn't posing a threat at that moment? Sonic and Robotnik meet up and Sonic fails to actually beat him. It's until Sonic uses a flying kick to realize that it's just a hologram. Robotnik explains his current dilemma and wants Sonic's help to stop whatever threat is causing his imminent demise. Sonic and Rotor take a trip over to Robotnik's base. While the three of them try to narrow down the possible perpetrator, Mecha shows up with a horde of Metal Sonic troopers stating that he needs to pay for the crimes he committed against the Kingdom of Acorn, along with mentioning Robotnik's 12-hour delay being up. Issue 158 begins with Robotnik gaining control over Mecha, and the Metal Sonic troopers just start going crazy. Sonic and Rotor escape the base, and the Metal Sonics go after Robotnik. Shadow finally wakes up, and we get this interesting scene with him and Robotnik. Dr. Robotnik attempts to convince Shadow to work for him, bringing up their connections with Gerald and how they share a common enemy. This initially works until the Metals reach Hope Kintabor's house. While Shadow wasn't able to save Maria, he won't make the same mistake again with Hope, giving his character some sort of depth within this arc. It ain't much, but I appreciate the inclusion of it. Back at Knothole with Sonic and Rotor, they learn from Uncle Chuck that he was the one responsible for the Metal Sonic troopers. They were made in Sonic's absence when he was sent into space in issue 125, but when Sonic got back, the trooper project was ultimately discontinued. Back at Sonic's house, Jules and Bernadette, Sonic's parents, discuss how Sonic is constantly risking his life. Jules says that his son isn't a toddler. Bernadette, however, believes that they're still responsible for his well-being, and that it's their job to protect him. Sonic makes his way into Hope's house and fights off the hordes of Metals with Shadow, until he accidentally knocks one into Hope. Shadow tells Sonic that if Hope dies, so will him, leading into the conclusion of this storyline. The final issue from Penders, 159, begins with Sonic and Shadow finally duking it out. Shadow questions the relation between Sonic and the Metals, but Sonic himself denies any correlation between him and the robots. The fight is halted, however, as Sonic and Shadow put their differences aside and rush to save Hope. Shadow uses Chaos Control to transport them to Castle Acorn. When Sonic reaches Castle Acorn, he briefly vents his frustration about the idea of Metal Sonic troopers. However, the Metals are approaching, so Sonic takes them out. Shadow jumps in, and with his Chaos Control, defeats the Metals. Sonic gets a Medal of Honor and is assigned a rank of Gentleman at Arms. The story concludes with Sonic and Shadow parting ways, signifying the end for now. Overall, this was a decent story arc. While I didn't like how poorly paced the Sonic parent stuff was, the way it was implemented was done rather sloppily in my opinion. but I liked the concept of it, trying to add some sort of emotional value towards this story. The fight between Shadow and Metal in 157, along with the advertised fight in 158 that wasn't actually in 158, but rather just a 2-page battle in 159, were both lackluster, but I did enjoy quite a lot within the issues. Sonic and Robotnik working together to stop an unknown threat, Shadow's small bit of character development, and the ending with Sonic's new status kinda signifies a finale of some sorts. For Penders' last contribution in the series, it was alright. It wasn't a perfect way to go out, but to say I didn't enjoy it would be an absolute lie.